Hey guys, this is Miss Arlequin, and in this video, we are going to be reading a test passage called The Storyteller, and then I'm going to be going through the questions and just kind of thinking through my thought process as I choose the correct answer and eliminate the wrong answers. So I'm going to be analyzing the questions. Excerpt from The Storyteller by Saki. It was a hot afternoon, and the railway carriage was correspondingly sultry, and the next stop was at Temple Combe, nearly an hour ahead. The occupants of the carriage were a small girl, and a smaller girl, and a small boy. An aunt belonging to the children occupied one corner seat, and the further corner seat on the opposite side was occupied by a bachelor who was a stranger to their party, but the small girls and the small boy emphatically occupied the compartment. Both the aunt and the children were conversational in a limited, persistent way, reminding one of the attentions of a housefly that refuses to be discouraged. Most of the aunt's remarks seemed to begin with "don't," and nearly all of the children's remarks began with "why." The bachelor said nothing out loud. "Don't, Cyril, don't," exclaimed the aunt, as the small boy began smacking the cushions of the seat, producing a cloud of dust at each blow. The frown on the bachelor's face was deepening to a scowl. He was a hard, unsympathetic man, the aunt decided in her mind. The smaller girl created a diversion by beginning to recite "On the Road to Mandalay." "Come over here and listen to a story," said the aunt, when the bachelor had looked twice at her and once at the communication cord. The children moved listlessly toward the aunt's end of the carriage. Evidently, her reputation as a storyteller did not rank high in their estimation. She began an unenterprising and deplorably uninteresting story about a little girl who was good, and made friends with everyone on account of her goodness, and was finally saved from a mad bull by a number of rescuers who admired her moral character. "Wouldn't they have saved her if she hadn't been good?" demanded the bigger of the small girls. It was exactly the question that the bachelor had wanted to ask. "Well, yes," admitted the aunt lamely, "but I don't think they would have run quite so fast to her help if they had not liked her so much." "It's the stupidest story I've ever heard," said the bigger of the small girls, with immense conviction. "I didn't listen after the first bit. It was so stupid," said Cyril. "You don't seem to be a success as a storyteller," said the bachelor suddenly from his corner. The aunt bristled in instant defense at this unexpected attack. "Perhaps you would like to tell them a story?" was the aunt's retort. "Tell us a story," demanded the bigger of the small girls. "Once upon a time," began the bachelor, "there was a little girl called Bertha, who was extraordinarily good." The children's momentarily aroused interest began at once to flicker. All stories seemed dreadfully alike, no matter who told them. "She was so good," continued the bachelor, "that she won several medals for goodness, which she always wore pinned onto her dress. There was a medal for obedience, another medal for punctuality, and a third for good behavior. They were large metal medals, and they clinked against one another as she walked. Everybody talked about her goodness, and the prince of the country got to hear about it, and he said that as she was so very good, she might be allowed once a week to walk in his park, which was just outside the town. It was a beautiful park, and there were lots of little pigs running all over the place. Just then an enormous wolf came prowling into the park to see if he could catch a fat little pig for its supper. The first thing that it saw in the park was Bertha. Her pinafore was so spotlessly white and clean that it could be seen from a great distance. Bertha saw the wolf and saw that it was stealing towards her, and she began to wish that she had never been allowed to come into the park. She ran as hard as she could, and the wolf came after her with huge leaps and bounds. She managed to reach a shrubbery of myrtle bushes, and she hid herself in one of the thickest of the bushes. Bertha was trembling very much at having the wolf prowling and sniffing so near her. As she trembled, the medal for obedience clinked against the medals for good conduct and punctuality. The wolf was just moving away when he heard the sound of the medals clinking and stopped to listen. They clinked again in a bush quite near him. He dashed into the bush, his pale gray eyes gleaming with ferocity and triumph, and dragged Bertha out and devoured her to the last morsel. All that was left of her were her shoes, bits of clothing, and the 3 medals for goodness. Were any of the little pigs killed? No, they all escaped. The story began badly, said the smaller of the small girls, but it had a beautiful ending. It was the most beautiful story that I ever heard, said the bigger of the small girls, with immense decision. It is the only beautiful story I have ever heard, said Cyril. A dissentient opinion came from the aunt. A most improper story to tell to the young children. You have undermined the effect of years of careful teaching. At any rate, said the bachelor, collecting his belongings preparatory to leaving the carriage, I kept them quiet for 10 minutes, which was more than you were able to do. Unhappy woman, he observed to himself as he walked down the platform of Telecombe Station. For the next 6 months or so, those children will assail her in public with demands for an improper story. All right, so now it's time to look at the questions related to the test passage, the storyteller. All right, question number 1. What does paragraph 1 reveal about the bachelor? All right, so obviously we're going to go back to the first paragraph and we're going to reread. It was a hot afternoon, the railway car. All right, it's hot. I remember the aunt's there with the children. Okay, so here we go, bachelor. An aunt belonging to the children occupied one corner, and the further seat on the opposite side was occupied by a bachelor who was a stranger. All right, so they're talking. Most of the aunt's remarks seem to begin with don't, and nearly all of the children's remarks began with why. The bachelor said nothing out loud. Don't, Cyril, don't, exclaimed the aunt as a small boy. All right, so the bachelor doesn't know them. He clearly sees that the aunt is kind of strict and doesn't seem that engaging with the children, the fact that she's telling them not to do things, and the children are questioning her constantly, like, why can't they do that, why can't they do that? But he doesn't say anything. So what does that tell me about someone who's clearly seeing not a great family relationship? He's smart, right? He knows to mind his business. It would kind of be inappropriate for him to say anything to the aunt, to criticize the way she's treating the kids. He probably enjoys meeting others in the carriage. All right, there's no way to know that that's true. He's eager to do something to entertain the children. I mean, this is too early to guess anything related to this. He is likely annoyed by the journey and by the activity. I mean, he doesn't say anything. If I was him, I would be annoyed. This seems like a possible answer. Or he's willing to discipline the children. There's nothing there that shows that he wants to discipline them or that he even thinks the children are doing anything wrong. So most likely, he's annoyed. That's going to be the best answer choice. All right, the description of the aunt's conversation with the children near the beginning of the passage serves to illustrate her. All right, let me just go back into the passage. I know I read the first paragraph, but let me just scan down here and see what else. All right, so they're talking about she wants them to listen to a story. She's not a good storyteller. And she's telling a story that clearly the kids don't like that much. All right, and obviously from first paragraph, I know that she keeps telling them not to do things, and they don't understand. They keep saying, why? She doesn't seem very understanding. Okay. Does she understand what the children enjoy? Well, no. Right? I kind of already said that. Sensitivity to what the bachelor thinks of the children. She doesn't even acknowledge the bachelor. There's no interaction between them in the beginning. Curiosity about the children's actions. No, she's just telling them not to do things. Lack of control over the children's behavior. Ooh, that is a tempting answer choice. I actually think I like this answer choice better because they are constantly misbehaving. It says in paragraph 1 that she keeps telling them don't. She keeps telling them not to do certain things. And then we could kind of say understanding of what children enjoy. This actually, now I look back on this and I realize this is not true because she knows they like stories. She understands that they like stories. She just doesn't understand that her stories are not that interesting. So this is only half true. This is the better answer. All right, question 3. Which statement best reflects one of the central themes in the passage? All right, so what is the lesson that I've kind of learned from this passage? What was it about? I got to kind of recap. So the aunt tells boring stories. She's not really controlling the kids. The bachelor, he does understand the children. He's able to tell them a story that, while it's kind of maybe not appropriate, at least entertain them. All right. So what is proper is not always what is the most interesting. Oh, that's very good, right? Her stories are all about being good. Those are not good stories. They're not fun. Children have a way of understanding what is best for them. No, this is ridiculous. Goodness is almost always rewarded with kind actions. Okay, no. Children should take care never to trust strangers. No, this is not a warning story about strangers. This is what it is. The aunt wants to tell proper stories that are about children behaving and good things happening to them. The Bachelor tells a story about somebody who's good, who gets eaten, which is not a good lesson, but it was an interesting story. All right, question 4. Read the sentence from the passage. She began an unenterprising and deplorably uninteresting story about a little girl who was good and made friends with everyone on account of her goodness, and was finally saved from a mad bull by a number of rescuers who admired her moral character. Based on the passage, what does the word deplorably most likely mean? Uninteresting and a blankly uninteresting. Able to be saved? No. Deeply frightening, uninteresting story? No. Unnecessarily long? Maybe. Worthy of disgust? This is a very tough one. Nobody, although obviously okay, now I see. D is the answer clearly because no one said the story was long. There's no other evidence to back it up, but there is evidence that the kids were disgusted by the story. They were not interested in it whatsoever. All right, so I'm going to go with D. Oh, no, went too ahead. 5. What does paragraph 9 reveal about the children? Okay, let's look at paragraph 9. Here we go. It's the stupidest story I've ever heard, said the bigger of the small girls with immense conviction. All right, immense means large, and if you speak with conviction, it means that you're very sure of yourself. And they clearly don't like the aunt's story. And they're not afraid to tell the aunt, which is very interesting. They're not trying to spare her feelings. They agree with the Bachelor's opinion of the story. Yeah, that's true. If I go back, I mean, I kind of remember this, but let me just double check. The Bachelor, yeah, he does not like the story either. You don't seem to be success as a storyteller. All right, that's good evidence right there that he doesn't like it. And I also know he doesn't like it because he tells a more interesting one. They have little respect for their aunt. Ooh, that's a good answer too. They don't understand what their aunt has said. No, that's not true. They believe the story was probably true. That's irrelevant. So now I'm thinking about this. At the point in the story where the little girl says that in paragraph 9, the Bachelor hasn't spoken yet, so they don't actually know what his opinion is. But it's very clear the fact that they rudely tell her that the story is horrible. I mean, that's not a very respectful thing to do. So I'm going to go with B as the better answer. All right, question 6. Why does the Bachelor agree to tell the children a story? He believes he can teach them an important lesson. No, his story has no lesson. The girl gets killed at the end for being good. He feels sorry for the aunt's continued attempts. This is possible. I think I'm going to have to go back and check. He knows he can do better than the aunt has done. Tempting. He wants to be good-natured and agreeable. No, I mean, he didn't have to speak at all. I mean, yeah, he could have just stayed quiet and minded his own business. It's either B or C. I mean, this is definitely true. He obviously knows he can do better. I just want to double check. Is there any evidence that he feels sorry for the aunt? All right. He was a hard and unsympathetic man, the aunt decided in her mind. All right, so that's the aunt's opinion. How does he feel? He says, you don't seem to okay. He does not feel bad for her because the fact that he tells her so bluntly that she's not successful as a storyteller actually is a little bit rude, and you can tell that it's rude because the aunt bristled in instant defense. If you felt bad for somebody, you wouldn't flat out tell them that they weren't good at what they had just done. You would be a little bit more tactful. So it's clearly C. He knows he can do better. All All right, 7. Why do the children begin to lose interest in the Bachelor's story? All right, that's easy. I remember that his story starts out almost exactly like the ant story, which they hate. So they were interested before they saw that his story was going to be exactly like the ants, or so they thought. So they believe that it won't be as interesting as their ant story. No, this contradicts. Their ant story is not interesting at all. They worried that the story might actually be about them. There's no clue that that's true. They think that a story will be similar. This is the answer. They know how the Bachelor story is going to end. No, they don't. It is C. All right, and finally, which lines from the passage best support the passage's central theme? All right, so we had a question that actually was related to this, right? That the theme is about how something that is proper is not always what is most interesting. That's one of the themes. So this might not be evidence to relate to that theme. It could be a different theme. All right. He was a hard, unsympathetic man, the ant decided in her mind. This is just a description of the Bachelor. This does not teach me a lesson. The children's momentarily aroused interest began at once to flicker. All stories seemed dreadfully alike, no matter who told them. This shows conflict in the story, but it's not a theme. Although, actually, now that I think about it, I don't know if I want to eliminate that, though, because the theme from the earlier question was about how proper stories are not always interesting, and this actually does show that. All right, so this could be an answer. Change my mind. But C says there was a medal for obedience, another medal for punctuality, and a third for good behavior. I mean, this evidence just shows that you can be awarded for being good, but that's not really the theme of this story. D. Bertha saw the wolf and so was stealing towards her, and she began to wish that she had never been allowed to come into the park. So this shows me that sometimes you might regret your actions. That's what this evidence is about. But that's not the theme of the story. So good thing I second-guessed myself, because B is clearly the most closely related to theme. And it is related to the previous question about theme. So that's also another lucky connection, which helped me with this question.